Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer you up to you this day, and we ask that you may answer our prayers in ways that lead us to glorify you. Let us always celebrate in gratitude everything you have done for us, and let us become the people that you seek us to be. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, yesterday we talked about the relationship between the husband and the wife, and we explained what that really means. And this is from Ephesians and the latter part of chapter 5. But there, what we see is it's not a case of the husband is called to live a tyrannical relationship with the rest of the family, but he is called to be with the wife, subordinate to Christ, and in service to each other. And that's where we're going with that. Now, obviously, we also have to understand that Paul is speaking to the Ephesians, which is their own culture, and there are different cultures that develop out of, over the centuries. But it all comes down to seeking to do what Christ calls us to do. Well, we want to see this a little further. And, there is a passage in here that is oftentimes forgotten. So let me explain. This is Ephesians 6, 1 through 9. So it continues the theme of how people are to treat each other. And we know that there is a commandment: honor your mother and father. Honor your father and mother. That's the commandment. And I know there are a lot of parents that will cite that. Well, there's a commandment: honor your father and mother. But Paul also commands fathers not to nag your children. There's different translations. And the one that I like to use: do not nag your children, otherwise they lose heart. So, and one of the ways that children get nagged all the time is you have to get an A, you have to get an A, you have to get an A, you have to get an A. I love to tell the joke, which is true, by the way, that my father made it very clear with me that he would not accept me bringing home a C. And then I always say, hey, get used to it. I'm just one of those people, you see, I learn by doing. And this is an important lesson, because you may have a child who learns by doing and may not do well in the classroom environment. And I'm clearly in that perspective. I can give you a classic example. I use it all the time. I've taken 5 years of French. I don't speak French. Don't know how. I took 5 years of French, but it was in the classroom environment, which I don't do well. I speak Spanish and Portuguese. I'm fluent in Spanish, and I'm growing in Portuguese. I've never taken a class in Portuguese. I've used one of those online services only to help me to better speak to my Portuguese-speaking parishioners. They're Brazilians. But I've never taken class in Portuguese, and I learned Spanish once I learned the basics just by constantly using it and reading everything I could in Spanish and everything else. It's important for us. I am not into liberation theology, but we do have to study it as Catholic priests if we're going to work in the Latino community. And I read Gustavo Gutierrez's books in Spanish, but I can't speak French. So if you're dealing with your children and they're having trouble in school, and you say, well, they're not working hard enough. They may be working hard enough, but that's not their style of learning. And one of the things that fascinated me, I first learned this when I went into the military. I'd never seen this before when I went into the Navy. And I've since talked to a recruiter who said exactly the same thing. A lot of people students who fail out of high school don't fail out because they're lazy or they can't do the work. It's that they're actually smarter than the target of high school. High school is, you think of the bell curve, so it's here to the highest to the bell. Well, there are some people that are below that score and some people that are above that score. And it's really focused on that medium group. And there are people who just don't have what it takes in school, or better yet, reverse it, to people who just don't have schools that don't have what it takes to train certain people. So what'll happen is they'll say that they are a high school dropout. You're talking to someone and you say, well, how are you a high school dropout? You're so smart. I met someone like this, I think in boot camp was the first one I ever met. And he says, well, that's the problem. He says, because I am smarter than the target age in high school. And so that happens. But what'll happen is the parents will say they're not working hard enough, or they'll give them a hard time. And the problem is not the student, it's the curriculum and how the curriculum works and everything else. And especially for what I call, or people call, visual learners. I can learn by doing very well. I can even teach people how to do things, but don't put me in a classroom environment to learn something, because I'm not good at it. I learn by doing. So, and that's one of the great things to look at. If your son or daughter doesn't seem to be doing well in school, don't assume that don't nag them, as the term was used in some versions of the Bible. Don't nag them that they need to work harder. Instead, figure out what it is. And it may be that they are bored in school, or they're not being trained properly, or there may be a personal relationship problem between the teacher and the student. That happens too. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to St. Anthony Overnight from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, right here on WEZE 590 AM. And you can also hear us at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. We'll be right back right after this. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. And don't forget our own website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. Check out our website. Check out the archives of the show. Check out our Substack newsletter. Check out all kinds of things over there at CatholicAudiomedia.com. Well, in any case, we're talking about that line that comes from Ephesians. Fathers, do not nag your children. It's actually in the New American Bible Revised Edition, it's a little bit different, but basically that's what it says. And and to teach your children, and that is such an issue with school today. And, that sometimes the school mark becomes more important than anything else. And as I said, by the way, I told you that my father wouldn't tolerate me taking home C's, and he got used to it. Well, one of the grades I used to bring home a C in was Spanish, and I'm fluent in Spanish. I can speak Spanish to anyone. As a matter of fact, it's kind of a funny story that happened. It was actually a Catholic high school this happened in, where someone in the school, they were teaching, which I guess is what they tend to do, is teaching Spanish from Spain. Now realize that would be like when your child is going to school here in the United States, they teach him British or her British English. And you'd go, why do you do that? I actually, when I'm in South America, I teach people, do not learn British English if you're going to work in the United States, because we don't speak British English, we speak American English. We can understand it fine, but we speak American English, and there's a big difference in there. So I always teach it. Well, he was at school, and when I heard that he was learning school in Spanish from Spain, I said, why do they do that? We don't speak Spanish, European Spanish here. So he mentioned it to the teacher. The teacher gave him 3 nights detention. Hello. And I told him later, I found this out later, I said, why didn't you tell me? And I was working with Sister Celeste, a wonderful Puerto Rican nun I work with. And she said, the two of us would have gone down to the teacher and saying, why did you do that? Because it's true. But that's an example of some of that nagging and not working on a level that we're called to do. I mean, she could have answered a simple question. We're learning it because it's a more refined Spanish, just as British English may be a more refined English. But if you're working in the perspective areas every day, if you're working with people who come from the Americas and you're speaking Spanish to them, they don't speak European Spanish, they speak American Spanish. So we understand that level, and always being there to be an advocate for your children, especially in schools. I've talked to a lot of parents, both parents here from the United States and parents of immigrant children, or immigrant parents of children who obviously are growing up here. And they're afraid to advocate for their son or daughter in school because they're afraid if they do, the schools will take it out on the child. So what happens is if there is a problem, it doesn't get addressed. Well, that's a form of not treating the child properly, which is what Paul calls you to do. So yeah, you do have to advocate for your child. When your child is wrong, you have to make sure the child knows that he or she is wrong. And when the teacher is wrong, you have to be able to address that with the teacher. But make sure that you can advocate properly, and that's part of what Paul encourages us to do. Not obviously literally in school because they didn't have it then, but that kind of a relationship. We'll talk more tomorrow. Have yourself a blessed day, and we will see you then. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation to the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.